Hello, and welcome to 5 ways to build better Power Automate workflows. My name's Dougie Wood, and I'm the Creative Director here at Valto, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP. The objective of today's webinar is to help you avoid pitfalls of Power Automate, as well as speeding up your learning of Power Automate. Maybe you've already got started with building out some Power Automate workflows to get the basics of what things are, but actually you're looking to improve things. So I'm teaching you some new concepts potentially and improving the quality of your overall work, getting you ready to build product or production level quality workflows. So this is taking you from the kind of first stages of creating a workflow just to make it work for the sake of it as a personal workflow, and then looking at how you can up that so that actually you've got some workflows which are ready to be rolled out to the wider organization. So first off, what is Power Automate? So Power Automate, you can access it via office.com, which is the Microsoft 365 homepage. It's a cloud interface. So unlike if you've been previously using things like SharePoint Designer workflows, SharePoint 2013 Designer, it's got a web interface, so you can get to it from office.com and you can log into it. But essentially what Power Automate is, it's for automating business processes. It's for creating workflows. So whether that be review processes to make sure that, say, documentation is being signed off with an approval process, setting up reminders, so making sure that you're maybe following up on tasks or maybe documents which are expiring after a certain period of time. Maybe it's just notifications. Maybe you want to get notified by something that's happening, a new document's been created, or something has happened inside of Microsoft 365 you want to be notified about. You could even build out things like notify when someone is checking in. So maybe building out something with Power Apps like a Power App to check in at reception, and then you're building up notifications with Power Automate to then go notify somebody either via Teams or via an email or something like that. Maybe you're looking at building out reports, so you could use a Power Automate to collect information and put that into a database or an Excel spreadsheet, Dataverse, or a SQL table, for example. And Power Automate is a low-code solution. So it works on a kind of if this, then that type of model, which actually, ironically, there is a third-party non-Microsoft product called If This Then That, but it works in the same way. So it is a kind of competitor to that in a sense that it's a drag and drop, no code, or potentially in areas low code, where we're using formulas a bit like Power Apps. But there's loads more functionality for us to explore. So that's a little bit of an overview of what is Power Automate. So first tip. So the first tip is to reduce unneeded triggers. So before I talk a bit about that, I just want to give a little bit of demonstration and talk about what is a trigger first off. So just jumping into the Power Automate Studio, this is what you would first see when you're creating a Power Automate workflow. And when we're talking about triggers, we're talking about what is the starting point of your workflow. Just like with anything in life, Power Automate has a start, a middle, and an end. It has a triggering point, so something that is going to wake it up and make it start. And then it has actions and conditions, which are in the middle of the workflow. And at the very end, it has either an automatic termination, or you can even add terminate logic throughout the workflow. So if something was equal to so X was equal to Y in a certain circumstance, you might want to automatically terminate. So if, I don't know, it ran out of time or there was a particular logic that you wanted it just to end, you could also choose to get it to end at any point as well. But what we're talking about here is the triggers. So actually it getting started. And there's all sorts of triggers. So it could be that something's manually triggered. Now this is great for if you're building out workflows where you just want to manually run it. So say, for example, rather than if you were building, sometimes people might build like a a PowerShell script to automate updating a bunch of items. You could do that with Power Automate as well, just as quick if you're not so familiar with PowerShell. But you don't obviously want to run that all the time or automatically. You just want it to run when you say you want it to run. So having a flow button or a manual trigger is a great way of doing that. Also, these flow button triggers, you can run from your mobile phone. So you could create, for example, a workflow in which when you click on a button, it say, checks you in or signs you into a certain location, and then a sign out button, for example. And that's just from a very basic button interface on your mobile phone. But there's all sorts of triggers as well. So we could integrate with things like Power Apps. So if something happens inside of a Power App, it could be a trigger inside of Planner. So a task is updated or closed or something like that. Something inside of SharePoint, so a document is uploaded. But there's all sorts of other apps in here. And connectors to third-party things like MailChimp, for example. So maybe if it's something's triggered with inside of a distribution list of emails which is being sent out. There's all sorts of, and they're not all Microsoft, as you've seen. There's all sorts of different connectors in here, so it's worth going in and taking a look at what's in here, because you might find that it'll integrate with some third-party products that you're already using. So that's the point of a trigger. So the trigger is a starting point. It's when something is happening. So let's just take an example like SharePoint. It might be when an item's created for a selected file, when a file is deleted. So it might be the trigger is when a file is deleted. That's going to be my trigger. I want it to send me a notification in Teams when a file is deleted, for example. There could be all sorts of different triggers, but that just gives you a bit of an example about why or what a Power Automate trigger is. So as a little recapper, your triggers is when something happens, is when an event occurs. So it could be like a new email is received, or a new document is created, something is deleted or edited, or you could schedule it. So something else as well that we didn't just look at then, but is actually scheduling, say, run this workflow at 7 o'clock every single morning, for example. So those are great for solutions where you're looking to, say, update something based on a certain period of time. So let's say, for example, pardon me, let's say, for example, you're looking for documents which are older than a month or something like that, or they've not been modified for a month, and you want to chase up the document owner. That's where you'll need a scheduled trigger to kick in. So why reduce the triggers then? So the first thing is it's easier to debug the workflow if there's less runs. As a developer, wearing my development hat, if you are looking at a workflow to try and debug what's gone wrong with it, and there are thousands of different runs going on. So a run is basically every time that workflow is triggered. And you want to make sure that things like it's only triggering if it actually needs to trigger. So let's take an example in SharePoint. You could set something to trigger if, say, for example, the document is modified or there's a new document created. But actually, you need to think about your logic and think, well, actually, is that the best trigger? Or is on document modified, we're going to get a lot of documents modified within our SharePoint area. Is that actually the best trigger? Is it going to be that 99% of the time, I'm going to trigger this, and actually the logic that I'm looking to run, so maybe it's like, is the document approved or something like that, is not the case 99% of the time. So 99% of the time, the workflow runs are completely pointless. So that's when you should be looking for either creating some custom conditions. So you can also take those triggers, and usually there's a way of adding advanced conditions to them to say, okay, only run if it's modified and the approval field is equal to true, for example, or something like that. So that way you can reduce the amount of time that's actually being triggered, makes it much easier to debug. So then if there is a problem with the approval process, you can go in and you can actually find the workflows easier, which have truly failed, rather than just they've tried to run and the logic wasn't true. So in theory, the more runs there are, the more chance that something could go wrong as well. So obviously, if we can, again, going back to that point of easier to debug, if you've got less runs, it'll be more obvious where a workflow is being triggered and what issues there are, and to find them. You've also got a 30-day limit as well on workflows. So reducing the number of kind of triggers is kind of important, when you're thinking about the overall solution. So you might have multiple kind of Power Automate sort of workflows, and you need to think about that, the fact that a workflow can only exist for 30 days. So from the point of it being triggered to then when it will automatically just kind of die is 30 days. And that's basically, so if you imagine Microsoft don't want to host workflows which are never ending. Basically, they're just constantly sat there ticking over, doing stuff or whatever. They've closed that kind of loophole by saying that a workflow can only last for 30 days. So say, for example, if you've got a workflow, like an approval process, for example, which you think is going to take longer than 30 days, you need to sort of architect your workflow and think about how you can have maybe multiple workflows which are triggered at different points. So it's when a Power Apps button is clicked, for example, or when the field changes inside of a SharePoint document to say that it's now gone from draft to pending, or it's gone from pending to approved, or something like that. So again, just being conscious of that 30-day limit and making sure that you're not just creating loads of workflows which are inevitably going to just die after a 30-day period. So plan out what will trigger and when. So that's basically what I'm saying there is think about what is going to trigger, when's it going to trigger, and think about your real business process and think about in real life, how long does it take for somebody to react to approval process, how long is it actually going to take them to turn it around, and then base those kind of real life workings into your automated workflow. And then think about reducing points of failure. So with this, think about what could fall down in different areas, and then try and reduce that. So it's a little bit controversial to what I was just saying in terms of you've got to think about maybe having multiple triggers, but also reduce points of failure. So I've gone down the route before of explaining this to clients in the past before, and they get so worried about this 30-day limit that they end up creating loads of different workflows with loads of different triggers. But you have to think about reducing the point of failure. The more triggers you've got, again, the more points of failure that something might not kick in. Power Automate isn't perfect. There are times where sometimes it doesn't run. Maybe there's an authenticator that's dropped, or a connection that's lost, or something like that. So the more workflows you have, again, you're introducing more potential points of failure. So you need to think about what's the sweet spot between what's the amount of workflows that you have running, as in to reduce that points of failure, but also to make sure that you're covering things like the 30-day limit. Also, from a back end, there's a finite amount of flow runs. So a lot of people are under the assumption that they get unlimited amount of flow runs. And that isn't the case. There is actually in the back end of your Microsoft 365 tenant a kind of pool of amount of flow runs, and it's based on your licenses. So that what licenses you have will dictate how many flow runs you have. And at the moment, it's something ridiculous. It's huge. You would never hit it. And in fact, I've never seen a client unintentionally hit that flow threshold. However, I always edge on the side of caution in the sense that if there is the functionality for Microsoft in the background to be tracking how many flow runs you have, even if it's a ridiculous number right now, it means they've got the potential in the future to change how licenses work and reduce that in the future. So they could say all of a sudden, hey guys, actually, we're now applying a realistic amount of flow runs per user against each person. So now your flow runs, which are running 1,000 times a day, are going to be run out of runs by the end of the week, type of thing. So obviously, I'm not saying that is going to happen, nor is there any kind of wind of that happening, but it could be a potential. So again, just to sort of it's better safe than sorry. Plan your workflows to use the minimum amount of flow runs as possible, so that if anything ever did change like that, you're not open to something which is just wasting flow runs just for the sake of it. You've already built it in a way. You don't need to come back and then try and make it more efficient. Better to make it more efficient from the first point. So that's the first top tip, is reducing unneeded triggers. And this is something which, again, takes you from that kind of amateur hour type of workflows to it being in a more production ready level workflow. The next thing that I want to talk about then is Power Automate templates. So what are Power Automate templates? Inside of Power Automate, we can see on the left hand side we've got a tab called templates, and this is where we can see hundreds if not thousands of different Power Automate templates. And I always say take them with a little bit of pinch of salt, because when you go into templates, I know for a long time, for a number of years, the top kind of template which was being used was something like, it was called something funny like, tell me the weather forecast in my current area. And I thought, well, you could just look out of a window and figure out whether it's sunny or raining. But that's not the point. What the point of these templates are is to get you potentially 80% of the way to a solution. So again, thinking about that weather scenario, it might not be necessarily that you're wanting to use that logic to tell you right now what the weather forecast is, but it's going to give you the ability to reverse engineer how to calculate what the weather forecast is going to be in a specific area. So that's 80% of the way there to a potential solution. So let's say, for example, you are a company which works outside a lot. So maybe you're an events planning company or a construction company, or there's something which requires your employees to be outside a lot of the time. You could take that workflow, run it 6 o'clock in the morning every single day to calculate what the weather's going to be. Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be rainy? Is it going to be snowy? What's it going to be like? And then based on the outcomes of that, again, doing a bit of a if this, then that type of logic, you could say, well, if it's going to be sunny or something like that, maybe you send an email to all of your staff to say, it's going to be sunny today, guys. Do you know what I mean? Wear shorts, flip-flops, blah, blah, blah. Or it's going to be rainy today, guys. Make sure that you're bringing your umbrella and coats and hats and whatever it is. That just shows just something that could be so simple, could make such a big difference to the outcome of people's day. And all you've done is set something up that's automatically sending out a Teams message or an email or however you wish to communicate with your employees. So the templates area is really useful. Take a little look, and there's all sorts of different things in here. It's also a great way of that if you're looking to think about integrating to a third-party application. Let's say, for example, I want to integrate, help if I could type. If I was wanting to integrate to Twitter, I could type in Twitter into this bar, and I can see all sorts of different templates which are automatically set up for me. So things like email yourself new tweets about a certain keyword, which that is actually really useful. I might not necessarily want to email myself, but maybe, look here, save tweets to an Excel online spreadsheet. So maybe I might want to do that. Maybe I'm doing some market research about a specific keyword, and every time it's mentioned, I want it to be logged into a spreadsheet or SharePoint list. This actually is something, once ages ago, I built a proof of concept for a client that wanted to kind of scrape Twitter for anywhere that their company was being mentioned, and then put that into a SharePoint list. Again, from there we did some more really interesting work using Power Automate with some AI to take out, for example, anything which we felt was a negative sentiment. So everything that we found which was tagged with, say, hashtag Valto, we would then put that into a SharePoint list and scanned it with some AI to determine its sentiment, so whether it was negative. So if it had a 70% chance of being negative, as in somebody saying, I had a really bad problem with this particular product or something like that, we could then immediately swing into action with Power Automate, recontact that person and say, sorry to hear about that, blah, 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 please provide us more details. And at the same time, we're also pinging a Teams message to our customer success team to say to them, there's this particular thing, please have a look at it. We could also do the same with something that's positive. So if somebody says, yeah, Valto is the best company, I've just had this really great project go through. We want to know about that. We want to post that all over our social media, and we want to kind of use it maybe as a case study. There's reasons we want to contact those people as well. So again, we can run that through some AI sentiment, figure out whether it's positive. If it is really super positive, then maybe again we're contacting them and asking them, can we use this as a case study or blah, 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 whatever it is. So again, it's all using the power of Power Automate to achieve that. So have a look through some of these templates. You're probably going to find all sorts of different things in here. As I say, from my experience, that they're never 100% of the solution. It's very rare you'll find something that says, yes, this is 100% of what I wanted to do. But from a learning perspective, you will learn so much by going in here and think, oh, I wouldn't have done it necessarily like that, but that's a really good way of doing it. And also you can filter them down. So whether it's approval-based related things, I'll just remove that Twitter search in here. But it might be that it's you're looking for approval sort of based things, or email related kind of workflows. So there's all sorts of different ways you can filter this down as well. So that was a little demo of the Power Automate templates. And as I say, review those templates first. Go and have a little look at them. You might have 70% of a workflow just built for you, ready. And if not, you'll tend to find it'll speed up the development process, because you'll be looking at how other people have done it, and again, learning from that. And it could show you a better way. So it could be that you were thinking, oh, I'm going to go and do this and blah, blah, blah. And then again, going back to this idea of reducing the amount of runs and things like that, you might find somebody else has done something and you go, oh, do you know what? That would actually save me X amount of runs by doing it in that way. So you might discover something new. Reverse engineer how connectors work. So again, it's another thing that if you're integrating to a third-party product, or even if it's a Microsoft product, sometimes it's just, say for example, you're wanting to integrate with the Word connector to create documents from templates or something like that. It might just be you think, actually, you add that connector to your own workflow and think, oh, I just don't get it. I don't understand how this is supposed to work. And then you go and look at a template and someone's already created it, and you go, oh, of course. You've got to get the data via this particular connector before you can create the document with this other connector. So it will shine a light on things that you need to know in order to get things working. And you might discover new connectors as well. So you might go, oh, I didn't realize actually this integrates natively with XYZ product. So again, having a little look through will kind of make sure that you're aware. So if you're then looking at this for creating workflows for people, someone might say, oh, I'm really wanting to integrate this with Twitter if possible, or they're talking about it maybe as if they don't know that it can integrate with Twitter, and you can be that person that goes, no, actually, did you know Power Automate can go and get that data from Twitter? So let's not do that step manually, let's automate that. So again, it's going to be really useful for you to know what these third-party connectors are and what they do. And as I say, just take it with a pinch of salt. Sometimes these workflows are a bit more like proof of concept type of things than full bulletproof production ready things. The workflows are actually created by real people, and then they're submitted to Microsoft to review as a template, and then they publish them. But as I say, quite often they are conceptual. They are showing you a way that you could possibly achieve something, rather than them necessarily being 100% bulletproof what you want it to do. The next tip is around error handling. So again, not everything works first time, and that's even me saying that. My workflows don't work first time. I like to make sure that I'm properly debugging my workflows, and I'm using things like variables and things like that to surface bits of data through the workflow, so as I run them to troubleshoot them and debug them, I can see exactly what's going on. So it's really worth thinking about building in what they call failure scopes. So in this screenshot here, you can see that I've got this box here called scope. And what that's doing is it's wrapping a particular set of actions into almost like a feature. So, for example, I've got this reoccurrence and I'm getting today's forecast, and then I'm going to be posting a message about that. So if that was to fail for some reason, let's say, for example, I couldn't get today's weather forecast. Maybe the API that's calling is down and it's going to fail. Or for whatever reason, I can't post a message. Maybe the connector I'm using to post that message is down and it's not going to allow me. I've wrapped that in what they call a scope, and this is going to be my failure scope. So then you can see down here, I've got a email here, which is a notification to say workflows failed, and maybe if I'm clever, I could include into that a little reason or why I think it's failed. But then you can see that I've got this like little red arrow here, which basically you can set an action to say run after something. So I've set this to run after this box has failed. So that email will only ever get sent if the scope has failed. So if something inside of that scope has failed, it will then contact me and say that there's been a failure. So this could be an email, it could be a Teams message, but basically what you're looking to do, you're looking to mitigate this workflow sort of dying a death because something's failed or errored out and nobody knows about it. The only way that you then know about it is that for whatever reason, the workflow is there in the first place is no longer meeting that objective. So people start coming to you and going, oh, I've not seen that weather message pop up for a week or two. What's going on with that? Are we stopped doing that? Are we not doing that anymore? So that's been a week or two worth of the workflow's not been running, and the employees have not been getting the benefit of finding out that forecast. Rather than it errors the first time and within minutes you're notified by it and looking at it. So potentially you can get it fixed within an hour, sent out again, and you could just say, hey guys, sorry about that, there's a bit of a blip, you're going to get notified within an hour. So you've resolved it much quicker than waiting for an end user to come and tell you that something is not working. So think about when you're error handling, what happens if nobody gets alerted? So what is the worst case scenario that this goes down and nobody knows about it? What's the worst case scenario? So that's why you need to be thinking about putting in these kind of scopings and sort of error handling methods. And also think about what happens if a flow runs for more than 30 days. Again, you could put some logic into this to make sure that actually someone's being notified that this is happening. And again, it's not just falling down a black hole. So that's error handling. And then the next tip is think about almost like naming conventions. And I get picked up on this a little bit. People think I'm a bit OCD in my kind of Power Automate workflows. For the real Power Automate workflows, when they are ready for production use, quite often workflows will they'll be supported potentially by other people. You might just be in a business where it's just you, and that's fine. And even if that was the case, you might find that actually you come back to a workflow after 6 months or a year and you think, oh, what is this workflow doing? So actually using what they call titles, notes and comments to help almost document the workflow within the workflow is really useful. So a title is, for example, I'm just trying to find my mouse here. A title's like this condition here. So condition tagged as important. So I always put something shorthand to say, what is the condition? So the condition tagged as important. Because one thing you can find is that you can end up with hundreds of variables called variable 1, variable 2, or conditions like this called condition 1, condition 2. And if they're nested, for example, it becomes even more complicated that you've got this condition 1 and you've got condition 2 nested in condition 1 and condition 3 and blah, blah, blah. And at a glance, without opening everything up and getting really kind of elbow deep in what everything is, it can be very disorientating inside of a workflow. So I try and make it as easy as possible for people. Give it a title first off, so you know that that's condition is tagged as important. So is this equal to important? Yes, sort of thing. And then what I would do is I would put in some notes. So I've just put if the important checkbox is equal to yes. So this is just a little note against something. So it makes it some human readable language. So I always put into there something that makes sense. It's almost like the calculation. So if this is equal to that, and then that way, if I ever come back to this and I'm debugging it or troubleshooting it, and I can go, okay, well, the original idea is that the calculation should be A add B equals C. So if I put that into my little notes here, if I then look at this and go, oh, okay, well, A isn't equal to B, so actually this logic is completely wrong. So it's a good way of kind of making sure that you're kind of staying on point and keeping it relevant. It's hard for others and yourself later to pick up if you've not put these things in place. You can also add comments now as well. So in this screenshot, you can't actually see any comments, but a little bit like Do you know in a Word document where you go and click on insert and then comment, and then you get like a comments feed on the right hand side? You can now do that in Power Automate as well. And actually, I find that's more useful for if you're collaborating on a workflow with multiple people. You can put some comments in there just to sort of say, have you thought about doing X, Y, Z? Or this would be a bit more efficient if you took this condition and did blah, blah, blah. And you can put some comments in that. It's great for kind of that collaborational feel. So as I say, it's building the documentation into the solution. So then wherever that solution goes, it moves in, puts it into a solution file, you move it between different environments and things like that. That workflow will keep that documentation within inside of it. Again, think about scopes to cluster actions into features. So again, I typically will wrap actions like we're looking in the last one about debugging. The last tip was about debugging and scopes. Give your scope some names, some meaningful names. So it might be, give the scope a name to say, this is the get data scope. So this is where we're getting all our data, or this is a certain feature or something like that. So give it a name. So titles make clear without opening. So basically make sure that the titles are nice and clear, so you don't even have to open the action to see what it's doing. It's obvious that this is getting file metadata from the current file, and this is copying the file to the important folder within SharePoint. So it's obvious. I don't have to open that up to know what that action is doing. The other top tip as well is I always try and keep, when you edit the title of an action, you'll actually see that there'll be a default action or condition name. I keep that and then hyphen, then put something sort of custom to that action that's specific to that action after it, so that I know that this is the get file metadata action or the copy file action from SharePoint. Whereas if I just change that to important folder or if I just change that to important folder as a title name, I don't know that I'm using the copy file SharePoint action. So it makes it easier for me afterwards to kind of figure out what that action can do. If I wanted to say Google afterwards and say SharePoint copy file action, and then I can get some more information on it rather than losing the context of what that action actually is. So I'd say the notes are for human readable calculations or logic, and comments are for advanced details and collaboration. So the final thing then I want to talk about is service accounts. So service accounts, they are essentially an account which you use to build out your workflows. So it's typical for beginners to build org-wide kind of workflows with their own account. So imagine if I built out an approval workflow for expense requests with my Dougie Wood at valto.co.uk email address. That's going to get very confusing when people are receiving an email or Teams notification what says Dougie Wood. So it says Dougie Wood says that your approval is complete or something like that. Then I start getting questions in the office, people saying, oh, Dougie, did you see my approval? Did you see my expense request? Have you approved that yet? And I'm like, well, it's not actually me that's doing that. It was maybe going to your line manager who's approving it and things like that. So it's better to think about having a service account, which is maybe something like called automated at or automate at or do not reply at, Power Automate at, workflow at, or maybe even make it app specific to the actual process that you're looking at building, like leave request at or expense request at, so people feel and they understand from a user experience point of view that they're getting a message from a automated service account and maybe don't respond directly back to that email address. Whereas if it's coming from you, it doesn't look very professional, doesn't look very production ready in that sense. So think about having some service accounts. They're great for things like notification emails or sending Teams messages. Again, it's coming from the workflow creator, can be quite confusing and out of context, the process. It makes it much easier as well. If someone leaves, it sounds horrible, but if someone leaves, it makes it much easier to transition the workflows as well, because you can give someone else access to the service account. And in fact, actually, sometimes it's a good idea that even with a service account, the workflows which exist on the service account, you could share to some other accounts as well. So you could share it to your IT admin account or something like that, or your own Microsoft 365 business account, because again, you might want to be able to make sure that if something was to happen to that service account or whatever, you always have access via a secondary account as well. So service accounts are a really good way of making sure that the users are getting a good experience, that they understand from a user experience point of view that the messages come from an automated account. It's not come directly from a specific colleague or employee. And it just makes things a lot easier from that perspective. Also, then all of your kind of key production workflows are all stored in one location and then are scattered around. And as I say, if someone then leaves, it's not a case of then going and picking out to say, okay, what workflows so Joe Bloggs leaves, what workflows did he have on his account and things like that, and it creates another administration task to go and find all those things. So I would strongly recommend have a service account, have the workflows that are key to your business assigned to them, and you know where they are, you know where they live, and it's much easier then to go and find them afterwards. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. We've looked at all sorts of different things about Power Automate, and hopefully now you've got the tips that you need in order to take your workflows from a amateur hour type of workflow to a production level workflow which is ready for the wider organization to see. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave this open for the next 5 minutes. I do encourage, if you've got any questions at all, please use the comments box below this video. Myself and my other colleagues are going to be on standby for roughly the next 5 minutes or so to answer any of the questions you have about Power Automate. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to email us at hello@valto.co.uk, and we're happy to answer any questions for you. I'm just going to waffle a little bit now for the next kind of 5 minutes whilst any questions are coming through. But it's worth knowing as well that we do offer full services around Power Automate. So whether it's you're looking at getting a team upskilled into Power Automate and you need additional partner who's going to help you through that process, Valto do have a adoption specialization, meaning that we can help you get adopted with something like Power Automate and the Power Platform. We do offer workshops as well, so we can talk to you about creating a Power Platform strategy, which talks about things like Power Automate, how you're going to set up environments, how you're going to ensure your data is properly governed. These are all the different things that we go into and talk about as part of the Power Platform strategy. We can also help scope out if you're looking for somebody to build a workflow for you. We can scope that out. So we offer workshop sessions in which we will go into much greater detail with you what the workflow is, how it works, things like that. And then we can come back and say, this is a fixed price project to build that workflow for you, as well as we can train you up along the way. So something as well, which is quite common now, is we help people by building out minimal viable product size workflows and train you up on how to then adopt it, support it, further enhance it yourself. As I say, if you've got any questions at all, please use the comments box below. Type those questions out. Let us know if you've got anything. We'll do our very best answering those kind of questions. If you're watching this afterwards on a kind of repeat and we're not available, obviously then email us at hello@valto.co.uk. If you've got any other questions about Power Platform, again, you can email us. We're happy to have a conversation with you and talk about how we can potentially help you solve those problems. I just want to thank you for joining today's webinar. As I said, I'm just going to leave this running now for a couple more minutes, just on silent. If you've got any questions, or do drop them below. You can also reach out at hello@valto.co.uk. Thank you very much for watching today. Do look out for our future webinars, and we'll see you soon.